Welcome and thank you for joining us today online for the Friday Focus. So for anyone who isn't familiar with the format, Friday Focus is an online talk series hosted by the Hunterian, and we are the Museum and Art Gallery at the University of Glasgow. So in each of these talks, we will hear from a different speaker covering a different topic. We tend to look at our exhibitions and displays, research happening here and across the University of Glasgow, as well as all the exciting work that happens behind the scenes with our collections. So this week, we're pleased to be joined by Dr. Ailsa Boyd, who's going to talk to us about the story behind the well-known Glasgow building, the Coopers Building on Great Western Road. We'll hear about the architect behind the design and the company it was built for in 1886. Ailsa will give us a bit of a presentation, and then there will be time at the end for any questions that you might have. You can pop your questions into the chat by clicking on the speech bubble at the bottom of your screen, and I can read those out at the very end. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us online today, and I'll hand you over to Ailsa now to deliver this week's talk. Thanks, Ailsa.
Thank you very much, Zoe. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Bear with me while I do this. Okay, does that look okay for everyone? Does that fine, Zoe? Great. Excellent. So good afternoon, everybody. My academic research centres around Victorian interior design and writing on interiors, but recently I've been more interested in the architecture of the buildings I pass every day, particularly an architect called Robert Duncan, who designed my own house. For Glasgow's 850th celebrations, I'm going to reveal Duncan's working relationship with one of Glasgow's most famous grocery companies at the end of the 19th century, Cooper and Company. So I will focus on this West End landmark just around the corner from the Hunterian Art Gallery. Built in 1886 to Robert Duncan's design, it was a flagship store of the grocers Cooper and Company. It's now B-listed, and since the 1980s, it's been a pub and a restaurant, but once again bears the name that is pressed into the pavement in brass. Today, I will tell you the story of the building, its design, its architect, and the company it was built for. This grand and impressive building fulfills the hyperbole of Cooper's advertising slogan, the most progressive and successful departmental stores in the country. First of all, I'll introduce you to the architect. He's little known today, but Duncan's career exemplifies the possibilities during one of the most exciting periods of Glasgow's built heritage. He was born in 1841 in Cardross, one of 5 children, and his father was a builder. By the time Robert was 10, his father had died and the family had moved to Glasgow. And on the 1861 census, his occupation was architect. By 1873, he was working with an older architect called John Graham Peat, who lived in Hamilton. And the partnership of Peat and Duncan continued until about 1890 on Peat's retirement. They began working in Glasgow in the 1880s, and Duncan's last recorded building is in 1906. So there's very little written about him, and the wonderful online resource, the Dictionary of Scottish Architects, is not entirely correct and only mentions a fraction of the 100 buildings I have identified by him. Throughout his career, Duncan designed all types of buildings required by the city's dramatic growth in the 1880s: warehouses, tenements, villas, and churches. As the city expanded, Duncan established the character of the neighbourhood of Cross Hill in the Southside, where I live. 8 of his buildings are now listed, including Cooper's, and several are landmarks in the city. So I'm going to show you a handful of them just now. This one is now known as Sovereign House. Duncan was commissioned to build the Institute for Adult Deaf and Dumb in 1893, which housed a gym, a library, and auditorium, as well as various other rooms for the entertainment and education of the adult deaf and dumb, as they were called in the 1890s. Duncan's style is a playful version of free Renaissance. He uses the classical language of columns and subtle incised decoration. He mixes square and round-headed windows, but the pepper pot towers are very Scots baronial. He utilises the unusual hillside with a basement well, which is protected by cast iron railings. Over the door is a demi-lunette shape between two solid pillars here, this shape here. It's a motif he'll repeat in others of his buildings. Here it encloses a sculptural relief of Christ healing the deaf and dumb man. With the interior all gone by the late 1980s, this became home to several businesses, including the architect's Kepi today. This building was originally built as a warehouse in 1898, so on Sauchiehall Street, and it housed several businesses, including Francis Smith, a furniture maker who worked with Charles Rennie Mackintosh. This dramatic facade shows some of Duncan's characteristic classical style. He freely uses the orders and different proportions. The building has a cast iron frame, which enables this number of large windows at the front. Originally, the ground floor had large plate glass windows and recessed doorways for the shop fronts. Giant Corinthian pilasters mark the main vertical divisions across the first and second floors, with restrained details of fasces and diamonds on the red sandstone, leading up to more exuberant carving, which is actually sea creatures in the top area up here, and a great big ball on the pediment. By 1910, part of the building was the Electric Theatre, one of the earliest cinemas in Glasgow. Then in 1929, the building embarked on perhaps its most famous incarnation as the Locarno Ballroom. It was considerably expanded to the back and rebuilt with a sprung dance floor, bars, restaurants, an ice skating rink, and a garage. It was always a landmark in Sauchiehall Street, but its dancing days ended with the closure of the Zanzibar in the 1980s, and it has since been a casino. Most of Duncan's work was domestic. From 1875, he cut his teeth in partnership with Pete, building many tenements and single ends for colliery workers in Hamilton. When they got a foothold in Glasgow in the 1880s, they built tenements in the wide streets of Pollokshields, like Kenmure Street. And between 1889 to 1904, Duncan gradually built houses along most of the south side of Dixon Avenue, which I'm showing you here. They're terraced and semi-detached villas for the middle classes. He lived in one himself at number 92. The unusually large semicircular bay windows in the gardens at the front give Cross Hill an individual character, which has now been recognised as a conservation area. Nearby is the former Church of Christ in Copplaw Street, completed in 1899. Duncan designed several churches for nonconformist sects. This small church has a simple pitched roof design with Gothic-inspired details, like the solid corner pillars and the pointed arch windows. The rusticated red sandstone has suffered, unfortunately, with some of the details being lost, along with the original stained glass. By the 1890s, Duncan often worked with builders Walker and Dick, and they built about a dozen villas around the area of Springkell Drive in Pollokshields between 1895 and 1898. The plans indicate that Walker and Dick bought the plots from the Maxwell family, and Duncan designed houses within their specifications that no two villas should be exactly alike. Whitehall is the only one that is B listed. It looks out over the duck pond of Maxwell Park and was built in 1895 for William R. Gray, a ship owner and chandler. Again, in free Renaissance style, this is a rather severe symmetrical look with its Ionic columns on the window and portico, more rustic bracketing above the windows, and a cast iron railing at the very top above the original billiard room of the house. Inside, there are white marble fireplaces, wooden panelling and stained glass, including Alida and the Swan, probably by E.A. Davidson. And next door, on the corner of St Andrew's Drive, the owner was kind enough to show me around inside to see all the marvellous stained glass on those big bay windows and the detailed plasterwork. These are very much houses built to show off the wealth of the occupants, as they are filled with glorious decorative details in the public rooms. But at the back of this one, there were originally only 2 windows from which you could see the large garden, not including this stained glass one over the stair, which, although beautiful, you can't actually see through. The many servants required to keep these houses going from basement to attic would have had a very restricted view. This is Duncan's largest building, Ochil Hills Sanatorium in Kinrossshire of 1902. Set in an estate of 460 acres with a large fish pond in front, this was a TB sanatorium for those who could afford 5 guineas a week in recovery. The Glasgow Medical Journal tells us the building cost £35,000 and no trouble or expense has been spared to make the sanatorium as perfect as possible in every detail. After a ceremony where it was opened by an ancient key, The visitors then proceeded to inspect the interior of the building, the electrical appliances, and the septic tank sewage system, which of course we're all very keen to see, I'm sure. The opening ceremony was presided over by the architect's younger brother, Dr. Ebenezer Duncan, who was an influential figure in public health, who was the driving force behind setting up the Victoria Hospital on the south side of Glasgow. The two wings of red sandstone have baronial influences, with little turrets at each end and oriel windows, finials, and a delicate lantern in the middle of the building. Unfortunately, this was removed by the 1940s. Perhaps it was just made of wood and difficult to maintain. The hospital closed completely in 1987 and was demolished completely in 2001. Duncan has suffered, as so many 19th century architects have, with the demolition of their buildings once they were past their use, or the complete change of them on the inside. However, to go back to the early part of his career, Duncan had a close and mutually beneficial relationship with Cooper and Company throughout the 1880s. He built and altered their commercial premises in both Hamilton and Glasgow, and also designed family homes for them in Helensburgh. The company was founded in 1871 by Thomas George Bishop, who we can see here in a portrait that is held by the Hunterian Art Gallery. He was a former travelling tea salesman and blender for Tetley's. Although born in Carlisle, his family were from Hamilton, which is where he married Elizabeth Henderson in 1871. In the same year, he started the business thanks to Lilias Cooper, who provided the capital, and he named the business after her. Anecdotally, she was his aunt, but it's more likely that she was his mother-in-law. He took an image of a Cooper and his barrel as the trademark of the firm. In 1873, his wife's elder brother, John Henderson, became his business partner, and 2 years later, he married his sister, Jane Bishop. Brother-in-laws in business together was not an unusual arrangement at the time. Jane, unfortunately, died a week after their daughter was born, and a decade later, Henderson married Rubina, another Bishop sister who had also been widowed. It makes for a really complicated family tree. So basically, the company was known as Cooper and Companies, but it was also Bishop and Henderson. So Cooper set up business in Howard Court, which we can see on this advert here. And this is an insurance plan from 1924, which has great detail about what's in each building. And we can see that it's Cooper and Company's stores. And this is Howard Court, where they started. And this is Howard Street. St Enoch, underground station is up here, so you can get your bearings. So they set up their business in Howard Court, and it was just behind the Glasgow Customs House, which was right on the river. So because they were near the river and the St Enoch railway station, they had direct supply chains from the rest of the world. Duncan was one of the architects involved in the rapidly expanding central warehouse and headquarters. Howard Street became Glasgow's Grocery Street, with Lyons and Lipton's also having premises nearby. Cooper's was an innovative and hugely successful business with a high reputation for quality, and as Bill Wallace has put it, Cooper's kept everything that the gastronomically inclined Victorian might require, and moreover, kept it at a reasonable price. By buying direct from suppliers in Europe and making everything from sausages to crystallized fruit in their own factories, they passed the savings on to their customers. Bishop wrote a pamphlet for his staff about the importance of personal service, and he insisted on a cash basis. By 1922, Cooper's had branches in 47 towns in the UK and 2 factories in Glasgow, as well as a trade by post. So between 1885 and 1891, Robert Duncan built or altered 16 properties for John Henderson and T.G. Bishop. Homes, workshops, factories, stables, shops and warehouses in Hamilton, Helensburgh and Glasgow. His first job for them was in Hamilton in 1885, which is where this plan is from. Pete and Duncan were doing most of their work at the time in Hamilton, although this plan is addressed down here at the bottom as from their Hope Street office in Glasgow. So this plan shows the addition of a flat above a coach house in Quarry Street for Messrs Bishop and Henderson. There are 2 bedrooms, 3 box beds, a kitchen and a scullery, simple accommodation for working men. And I'm pretty sure the building has now been demolished. So Bishop and Henderson obviously liked the working relationship with Pete and Duncan. For the next year, in 1886, they commissioned a huge amount of work from them, including the Great Western Shop, which I'll go on to talk about in more detail shortly. Duncan did several alterations on the Howard Street warehouses, including a trellis bridge linking two of the buildings and a new front for the sale room on Howard Court, which is the plan on the left. So this was the original Cooper's HQ, and Duncan is adding in large plate glass windows to create more of a modern shopping experience. He also built new workshops and a hoist or lift at the back of the Sauchiehall Street shop on the right. So this is now Wetherspoons in Sauchiehall Street, and you can just see, if you go down the lane at the back, Sauchiehall Lane, you can just see that these buildings still exist. So this increased the amount of groceries Coopers could produce and distribute around the country. Duncan also built stables for them in Rutherford Lane, which is now the car park of the Theatre Royal. Coopers were innovative in their customer service, and by the 1880s, telephones and electric lights were installed in their shops, along with other innovations like taking change and receipts by wires and later hydraulic brass tubes. They were also among the first to switch from horses to motor vehicles for deliveries and packaged many of their own product lines. This photograph from 1927 shows the extent of Cooper's buildings along Howard Street. Very little of his bustling commercial street still survives, unfortunately, because it now looks like this. And only the building on the far corner with Jamaica Street, which is Richer Sounds, that's the only one which now remains. And these modern buildings, this is the second rebuilding of this area. So all this work for Coopers enabled Pete and Duncan to move their main practice from Hamilton to Glasgow, perhaps due in part to the design of this extraordinary building, a great advertisement for both Coopers and Duncan. It is a French Renaissance chateau with a Glasgow accent, with its steep mansard roof covered in fish scale slates. It's made of blonde sandstone ashlar, and all the upper windows are arched and surrounded by decorated stone. There's ornate ironwork on 2 levels and on the top of the narrow pitched roof. The huge round clock tower is unique, and at ground level, the plate glass windows and huge pink granite Corinthian columns make a grand statement on the corner of the main road to the west. The original plans for the building, dated July 1886, show the modern design across 4 floors, where internal iron pillars hold up the concrete floors. There was a basement, homewares on the first floor with a warehouse and storage space above. There was also a hoist or lift, which is this section here. There were stone stairs, and hidden from the street, a covered court and stable leading out to the back lane where they could do deliveries. So the whole building is highly decorated from top to bottom in stone and ironwork with mostly Corinthian details. And here on the right, we have plasterwork of swags of fruit and flowers, which is in the ceiling of the door portico. After walking over Cooper's inlaid in brass at the front door, there is purple marble, deeply moulded plasterwork, and brightly coloured Minton tiles, which are both hard-wearing and beautiful, and these continued on the inside. These carved wooden banisters now only remain in the back stairwell, but you can see the original ones in this photograph from the 1890s. And you can see that this little detail here, unfortunately missing from the existing stairwell, but very fancy originally. It's quite the cornucopia inside. More Corinthian columns with decorative plaster, swags around the base, shiny marble, glass and woodwork on which is displayed colourful fruit, vegetables, cheese, packets and tins, which would have been a tempting assault on the senses. You can imagine the delight of shopping in Cooper's in 1890 from this photograph, with the wares set out under the ornate plaster columns lit by the huge windows, electric lights reflecting off mirrors and shiny mahogany. So today, the main hall has changed a little. Mostly the plaster columns have been stripped back to their cast iron structure, and the ornate wooden staircase has been removed. Interestingly, the bar is now in the same place as the main counter of the shop. So perhaps the Minton tiles are hidden under the wooden floor? When Duncan built this, he'd only completed one building of similar scale, design and purpose in Hamilton. This is Brandon Tower, built 9 years previously. in 1878. Again, this is mostly retail and built for John Ray. There were 2 shops on the ground floor, ware rooms above, and on the top 2 floors, 4 small tenement flats. In style, it's also based in the French Renaissance, although rather more solid and sober than Cooper's, with mostly squared-off windows set into a mansard roof. But there's also fish scale flashing on the dome, which is not missing its weather vane, and it's also now B-listed. Last year, when I took this photograph, it was looking rather neglected, and the French effect somewhat diminished as it is missing some of the decorative elements that you can see on the original plan, like the decorative cast iron railing around the top 2 tiers and the big urns on the corner plinths. I mean, it's possible these may never have made it off the plan, but I do think that probably the cast iron railing, if it's not maintained, it does tend to rust and become dangerous. So this building has a similarly imposing relationship with the surrounding area at New Cross or Top Cross in Hamilton. Across the road was the Hamilton Town Hall, which has now been demolished, but it is at the junction of 3 main streets, Quarry Street, Brandon Street and Lamb Street. When Duncan came to build Great Western Road, he developed his ideas in that hugely busy period of 1886, resulting in a more sophisticated use of the corner site. His plans changed between July and November, demonstrating his move towards more curved motifs and round masses, which would become more pronounced in his villa designs later, with his use of very round bay windows. As first designed, as we can see on the left here, the shop door was onto Great Western Road, not on the corner. So it was just slightly set in to one of the plate glass windows, and it was a double door with a couple of fluted columns next to it. But what was built on the right were these massive round pillars and a really deep entrance on the corner, creating a far more dramatic and interesting focus. Higher up also became round. This becomes rather more whimsical as he changes from a square tower to a round tower. And he also added the 4 clocks and a wrought iron circular balcony. And even higher up, we have, which is also from the original plans, this teeny tiny choragic monument of Lysicrates. This Greek temple could be a nod to the city's classical architecture innovated by Alexander Greek Thomson. Originally, you can see, of course, the tower was even taller because it had a weather vane. It seems that Bishop and Henderson were right to trust Duncan's design choices, for he made this corner site in the West End particularly impressive and unusual. After this building was completed, Duncan continued his working relationship with the owners of Cooper's. This is Towerville in Helensburgh, the home of John Henderson, partner in Cooper's and the double brother-in-law of T.G. Bishop. The Tudor Gothic villa was originally built in 1858 by John Honeyman, but in 1888, Henderson asked Pete and Duncan to extend the house considerably, adding this rounded gable to the right. They also built stables and staff quarters and landscaped the large garden, which also has a little folly in it as well, a little faux medieval folly in the corner of the garden, as every garden should have. Duncan's part of the building blends in with the original villa exterior and doesn't really prepare you for the magnificent decoration inside. He added a grand dining room and drawing or music room above, both public rooms perfectly suited to John Henderson showing off the wares of his shop at dinner parties. The hallway was given a grand oak staircase and ornately carved doors with stained glass fanlights and Jacobean ceiling plasterwork. There are Minton tiles in bathrooms and porches, inlaid wooden mirrors built into the wall, as well as massive fireplaces. The Gothic details in the panelling and plasterwork throughout match the original part of the building. But Duncan adds aesthetic movement motifs of sunflowers and decorative roundels of ladies, which are probably the early work of renowned stained glass designer Oscar Patterson. This is a large, impressive house with basements filled with wine cellars and attics with rooms for numerous servants. It's now split horizontally into 2 substantial homes. And on the left here, this is the impressive glass door for the drawing room, which has got themes of music, so it's now called the music room. In 1890, Henderson again commissioned Duncan to build a pair of villas along the road, Broomside and Fair Hall. The latter was for his older spinster sister. Broomside, where this lovely stained glass has survived, the buildings are both now split up into two flats, top and bottom. And it was let out as part of the growing Henderson and Bishop property portfolio. By 1922, when the company went public, the total value of Cooper's commercial properties was £693,000, which included shops, offices, dwelling houses, and sundry other occupancies, yielding a total yearly rental of nearly £10,000. So this is one of Duncan's last buildings for Cooper's in 1890 to 91, the offices and stores at 32 Herbert Street, North Woodside, Glasgow. I'm indebted to John R. Hume, the recorder of Glasgow's industrial past, whose photographs enabled me to match up with maps to identify this rather impressive, but unfortunately now demolished building. In this cul-de-sac, only the red sandstone printers building here on the right, that's the only thing that still survives, and it's now flats. So this is where Cooper's had a factory making jams, jellies, fruit preserves, chocolate and confectionery from the 1870s. These offices that Duncan built have an almost Georgian simplicity with two setback wings, and the unusual chimney configuration at the front, either side of a pediment with this demi-lunette opening in it. It's the motif that we've seen repeated in some of other Duncan buildings, which helped me to identify it. For such a dramatic landmark, it's surprising that this is the only drawing or painting of the building I have found so far in a public collection. And of course, I'd be really glad to know if there are any others. So this is a drawing by Muirhead Bone, which was published in his Glasgow 50 Drawings in 1911. Before being the first official war artist, Bone was known for his architectural subjects. The image indicates how busy the road is, with deliveries, shoppers, and the business on the left-hand side of the road have their shades pulled out against the sun. You can see how Cooper's is one of the tall towers of Kelvin Bridge, with the spires in the distance of St Mary's Episcopal Cathedral, the spire was completed in 1893, and Lansdowne United Presbyterian Church of 1863. So my photo shows how Bone has foreshortened the distance to ensure he got some of the trees in the middle distance. But it still emphasises the length of the long Great Western Road. You really notice the missing weather vane now, which we can see Bone has captured here. So there were later alterations to the building, of course. In 1923, after Duncan's retirement, another architect made alterations, building a new stairwell to the back over what had been the stables and had become the van shed. The plans show that the new banisters were to be carved to match the ones from Duncan's original drawing. But shopping habits changed, and after becoming a limited company in the 20s and on T.G. Bishop's death in 1922, by the 1960s, the company was bought over by Fine Fair and then faded from the high streets altogether. The floors upstairs were turned into flats and offices, and the ground floor became a succession of bars and is now happily bearing the Cooper's name again. In 1897, a visitor's guide to Glasgow described the artistically finished and massive business premises of Cooper & Co. In the evenings, when lighted with electric, these grocery and provision stores have a splendid appearance and are in good harmony with the surroundings. Cooper's shops seem to be particularly evocative. Many people remember buying broken biscuits or exotic produce not available anywhere else. The smell of ground coffee and the drama of watching receipts fly above their heads in the pneumatic tubes of polished brass and glass. Cooper's knew what they were doing in creating memorable shopping experiences involving all the senses. This is the intangible heritage held by such buildings, and I'd be very interested to hear from anyone with memories or stories of Cooper & Co. throughout the years. So it was certainly successful and lucrative for the Henderson and Bishop families. You can read about the Bishop collection of entomology and archaeology gifted to the Hunterian in the blog published to go with this talk, in the section written by a PhD student who's working on them, Ariana Maja-Iskova. And Robert Duncan's work with Cooper's demonstrates the close relationship possible between an innovative and successful company and the architect who designed their buildings in the bustling second city of the empire. Thank you very much, and I'm now happy to answer any questions. anybody has?
Well, thank you so much, Ailsa. That is fascinating. Some really great information about a building that I certainly walk past every day that's great to know more about. So if anyone has any questions, please do just pop them in the chat and I can read them out. But I was going to start by asking, so a company like Coopers & Co and perhaps Duncan himself seem to be embracing the industrial age and the technology that came along with that. Yet when we talk about the buildings, they're kind of maybe Gothic, classical, Renaissance in style. So I was just wondering what the appeal was for them of these more historical styles of architecture.
Well, that's a whole other lecture, which I have given in part. The Victorians loved looking at the past. And by looking at the past, you can compare it with the present. And very often, the historical interior and exterior designs like Baronial and all those sorts of things, very often they were a bit of a fancy skin to put on buildings. And you've got architects like Pugin who were looking back. He was a Gothic revivalist, but he looked back on the Gothic age as a time which was before industrialization, before the horrors of machines, and when people were able to hand make things and had pride in their work. And it's a big sort of societal discussion about what is the industrial age, the Victorian age, what is it doing to us? We've got industry, we can make all these things, but people are employed in factories and they're working so hard and everything's grimy with the coal dust. What is this industrial age? Let's have a look back at what was before, but can we create something for the future that actually responds to how we need to live today? And it was this sort of discussion was played out in the decoration and architecture of buildings at the time. And what I love about the Victorians is they could take something historical like Minton tiles, and which are based on medieval tiles, and they created something that was really modern, really practical, and also really beautiful. So Minton tiles still survive today. We still like them today. They go with decoration and they're eminently practical and wipeable. And I think the Victorians were great at managing to do that, mixing the old and the new to create something for their modern age, which we can still appreciate today.
Thank you so much for that. And we have another question in the chat. So Kevin Doyle is asking, have you seen inside the flats now in the Coopers building? And if so, do they retain any of the original features?
No, I haven't seen inside the flats, but I think because originally they were the warehouse areas, they wouldn't have had very many original features. The pictures I showed, it's actually a Deliveroo rider who posts photographs when he goes into interesting closes and stuff, because these are people's private homes. So you can see that the stairwell is still there in the tiles. And I haven't actually sort of rung on the buzzer and requested to be allowed to have a look in myself. But I know with some of Cooper's buildings, as I mentioned, they have been completely changed on the inside. And the former Institute for Deaf and Dumb, which is now Sovereign House, I have heard that the roof wasn't maintained, damp got in, so everything inside was spoiled. And so when they redid it in the 80s, they just redid the whole thing and chucked everything out. It's so frustrating because these things can be restored. But certainly in Coopers, I think the upstairs would have been a far more utilitarian area than the downstairs shopping floor.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I think that's all we have time for today. So thank you so much to Dr. Ailsa Boyd for joining us and your presentation. And thank you to everyone for joining us online. And hopefully we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Very much.
Bye-bye.